Let's Take This Outside with Marianne Iveson, the podcast where she speaks to athletes, outdoor professionals, and scientists about why they connect with nature.
Gloria Dickie is an award-winning journalist and author of 8 Bears, Mythic Past, and Imperiled Future. She is currently a global climate and environment correspondent at Reuters. In 2018, she was named a National Geographic Explorer, and 8 Bears was chosen as a best book of 2023 by The New Yorker, The Economist, and Scientific American, shortlisted for the 2023 Banff Center Mountain Book Awards, and received second place for the 2024 Rachel Carson Environment Book Award. Originally from Canada, she's currently based in London, England. Please give a warm welcome to Gloria Dickie. Gloria Dickie, welcome to Let's Take This Outside. I'm so excited to chat with you about bears.
Yeah, me too. It's a great topic.
I actually just found out, I knew you were from, Ontario, but I didn't know you were from London, Ontario.
Yes, which unfortunately does not have bears.
It does not. I grew up probably an hour past down the 401 towards Windsor area. So we definitely grew up in the same area. So I think that's hilarious that you just ended up in London, England, which is where you are now.
Yes, London to London, which I think this one's slightly better if no one at my hometown is offended, but it's a little hard. I mean, we do have the Thames River in London, Canada as well, but this one's a bit more famous.
What do you say to people in London when you're also from London? Have they heard of it? Do they know it exists or?
Well, I normally lie and I say Toronto so they don't get confused because everyone's if you say you're from London, they're well, you don't have an accent. And then if I eventually drill down further, then they'll be oh, I think I've heard of that London. They always think it's quite strange that we have a Hyde Park, the Thames, it's Piccadilly, all of our names are, we were Windsor too, right? We're Windsor Castle, so.
Yeah, there's so many towns that have the same.
Paris, Ontario.
Paris. Have you ever seen that meme where it's going to Europe on a budget on Ontario and it's just a map of Southern Ontario, hitting up Paris, London?
I've not seen that, yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to send it to you after. It's hilarious. I have to ask then, because again, we grew up kind of similar area in Canada. Where did your love of nature and environmentalism begin?
I think it kind of stemmed from a lack thereof almost in London. I mean, I love National Geographic magazines and nature documentaries. I was quite into squirrel watching for a long time, which is quite embarrassing to admit now. But I think that, my family was not quote unquote outdoorsy. We did not go camping. My brother was very afraid of bees. So it was everything was very indoor focused. But I think it was through consuming books and magazines and TV shows that I really kind of got quite into nature. And I think the other answer to that too is that my grandparents lived in Calgary growing up. So when we'd go out there, we'd go to Banff. And Banff is a pretty easy place, I think, to kind of fall in love with nature.
I agree. My sister lived in Canmore forever. She now lives in Cochrane, Alberta. And the first time I went out there and she lived in Canmore, again, it's one of the most beautiful places probably in the world to live in terms of living in a town surrounded by mountains. The first mountain I hiked was Moose Mountain. And that's where my love of hiking began, right? So it kind of always stems back to the Rocky Mountains, right? And it's so easy to fall in love at that point.
Yeah, I think one of my first memories actually is I remember seeing mountains. My 3-year-old mind or 4-year-old mind was blown just seeing these things, compared to London, Ontario, which is very different, very flat. And one of my other early memories, too, is that my parents were afraid I was going to be mauled by a grizzly bear in Banff. So I was on a leash the whole time. They had one of those child leashes to prevent me from running ahead on the trail. So I like to say that that's maybe my origin story is that childhood trauma of not being able to run and see bears led me in life. Yeah.
Full circle on that. So at what point in your life did you really start to care about climate change and environmentalism? Was it in school? Was it when did that begin?
Oh, yeah. It's interesting. Climate change was not part of the vernacular I went to high school in the mid 2000s. I think the first time it kind of registered in the mainstream was Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth came out. I don't know if you remember that documentary. It's about climate change, right? But I think, I was interested in environmental issues. I was in geography, which is quite nerdy. I was interested in wildlife trade, poaching. I really did not register climate change until I was probably in university. I just wasn't talked about. But yeah, I was very into environmental issues, I would say. I was in the environmental club at my high school and we would give out free LED light bulbs. We'd go door to door giving out light bulbs. Yeah, that was that was the beginning of the green movement. So,
and now in 2025, like day to day, what does your life look like being a global climate environmental correspondent, right? For Reuters? Is that the official title?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm covering basically, not only efforts to combat climate change, but the kind of scaling up impacts that we're seeing around the world, right? We just had the massive fires in LA. We're seeing flooding. We're seeing extreme rainfall events, extreme hurricanes hitting now too. So it's kind of being pretty tuned into the science of that beat, the politics of that beat, the financial side of that beat every day.
Before we dive into bears, as a climate correspondent, what are some of like the biggest challenges that you face when reporting on stuff? It's such a vast and complex topic, right? Like, what are some of these big challenges?
I mean, the initial challenges maybe 10 years ago was convincing people that climate change was happening and it was caused by humans. And I think that's not so much of a challenge now, right? People are seeing it every day. Winters aren't as cold, but you're also, again, seeing these extreme weather disasters. So the way that you cover climate change has shifted less from it exists to what do we do about it and why aren't we doing enough? But I think in terms of the challenges now, it's just competing for like headline space, right? You have two wars going on. You have Donald Trump in the US. You have so many like high rating, high value news happening that it's hard to keep people focused and having their sustained attention on climate change.
Your book, 8 Bears, Mythic Past and Imperiled Future, has received quite a bit of recognition, including being named the best book of 2023 by The New Yorker and The Economist.
One of, not the best, but one of. I wish, yeah.
Oh, sorry, one of the best. First of all, like, is this your first book?
Yep, it's my first book, yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. Like, I don't know, that's pretty high. Like, that's pretty high praise. Yeah,
it's pretty. I mean, I think like the bar always moves. Like it's great, but no one's ever like can rest on their laurels and be like, oh yes, I did it. But yeah, it was nice to see such positive feedback. I think even more so just from people who read the book. School children, strangely, I get like really cute bear art now from kids. Yeah, it's like the small things I think that actually make more of an impact.
Did you actually see a bear when you were out west? So like, when was the first time you saw a bear in real life? Can you remember that?
Yeah, I can. Yeah. So I was quite old. I was living in my parents' efforts to prevent me from seeing bears worked quite well for many years.
Can't protect you forever.
I was living in Boulder, Colorado, and there was a lot of bears around. And there was this program known as the Boulder Bear Sitters, wherein whenever the bears would wander into town, volunteers would go and they would like sit underneath the trees they were sleeping in to keep people away and like help the bears go back safely into the mountains in the evening. So I was like on their speed dial because I was like, I want to see, like, I was doing some like reporting at this time, but I'm like, if a bear comes in, like call me because I want to see it. So eventually it was 1 September, I got the call. There was a mom with 2 little cubs in town. My first bear was actually 3 little bears and they were all sleeping after having eaten apples. And the bear sitter was there making sure people stayed away. And so I remember seeing their little paws and their noses up in the tree.
What kind of bears were they?
Black bears, yeah.
They were black bears, okay. Is that when it kind of like zoomed in for you? You were like, yes, this is the animal that I think I'm obsessed with? Or did it slowly grow? Is obsession also a fair word to say?
I'm not like obsessed generally with like environmental things. Like I do quite like bears, but yeah, I mean, at that point I was already like quite intrigued by them and also just the conflicts between humans and bears in the town. That was kind of my first interest. I was also quite interested in mountain lions, but someone had already written a book about that in Boulder. So I was kind of like, okay, I'll look at the bear issues instead. But I mean, they're so iconic in the American West and the Canadian West too. I mean, Canada, as I write in my book, one of the first considered names for Canada was Ursalia, which means like place of bears, not Canada. So yeah, I think I was like obsessed for a long time. Anything that was like wasn't a squirrel, I was pretty excited about.
I want to ask you more about like the human aspect when they're like interacting, and because I had a guest on recently, I'm trying to remember who it was. They lead the guide in Churchill, Manitoba, and the polar bears, and like how they've kind of just totally like there's like no incidents anymore in terms of like polar bear and human interaction, like minimal compared to what it used to be in Churchill specifically. I guess it's like really gone down quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that was because Churchill had a landfill dump site until like the 1980s, which they eventually closed because, of course, garbage and food brings polar bears in closer contact. that could change as we see the sea ice melt out, right? The bears are spending more time on shore. There was quite a bad attack a few years ago. A woman was mauled going home from a Halloween party. She survived, but can't take anything for granted, I guess.
Can you give us a brief overview of your book, 8 Bears?
It has a very on-the-nose title, which is that there are 8 remaining people. But you know what? This is so there are 8 remaining species of bears left, hence the 8 Bears title. I do find it's a very popular pub trivia game if you bring up your book, because then everyone wants to name the 8 bears. I don't know if you could have named 8 bears before you read the book.
I was like, please don't put me on the spot, but I was going to ask you about the 8 bears, actually.
People get very competitive about how many bears they can name. They can normally name like 5 and then they just kind of give up. But yeah, so basically I was kind of doing a bunch of reporting as a journalist on grizzly bears and polar bears and black bears. And one day I think I was like, how many bears are there? Like, I wasn't sure how many bears there were. I was like, oh, 8 bears. And I was reading more about sun bears and moon bears and all these bears that I'd never heard of. And I was like, actually, 8 is a really convenient number for a book because it's like not too much, right? Like it's a good number to like explore each bear and like what's happening to it. And so that was kind of what intrigued me. And I ended up spending many years basically following scientists, following bears around the world and seeing, each bear's story in terms of its interactions through mythology and history with people and kind of those present day threats and what their future looked like.
You didn't do it just for the book. You were already following the...
I was doing bear reporting beforehand, but I did it specifically for the book. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, but it started that way and you started to get to know bears and then you were like, oh no, I'm going to do this for...
Yeah, like the North American species. So my master's project when I was in university was looking at bear-human conflict over garbage management in the American West, but also I went to Banff for that as well, because I always remember thinking like, oh, Banff has these like bear-proof garbage bins, like those things where you have to like get your hand up inside. And Boulder was trying to introduce them as like the first kind of mountain town to do that. And they were killing bears and all these conflicts happening. But that just kind of snowballed into covering efforts to remove protections from the Yellowstone grizzly bear, looking at polar bears and climate change. And then once I learned that there were, these 5 other species, I was kind of like, so that's when the book idea began to take shape. And I pitched the book. So,
okay, let's go through the 8 bears. And I would like you to name each bear. I feel like, I love these conversations because I feel like I'm 5 years old again, being like, okay, it's time to name all 8 bears.
I will name all 8 and I will say where they are found as well. Okay. So you have the American black bear, which North America, in case that wasn't obvious.
We have them here in Gatineau Park, or in Gatineau Park in Ontario, up here where I am. We have black bears. Yes.
Yes. It is the Ontario bear. Yes. And then there's also the brown bear, of which the grizzly bear is a subspecies, right? So people often say grizzly bear. Technically, brown bears span across Europe and Eurasia, one of the widest ranging bear species. And of course, it's also what we have in Western Canada. You have the polar bear, found across 5 of the Arctic nations. You have the panda in China, which is in fact a bear. Most people always say it's not a bear. And I'm like, no, it's a bear. You have the spectacled bear or the Andean bear in South America. So Peru, Paddington, in theory, that's an Andean bear. You have the sun bear, which is found across Southeast Asia, as well as the Asiatic black bear, which is, again, Asia, or the moon bear is the fun name for that one. Which one am I forgetting? The sloth bear, which is on the Indian subcontinent and the most deadly bear in the world.
Let's Take This Outside now has a newsletter. Keep up to date with outdoor news, events, and great discount codes and deals from our partners. Sign up today at letstakethisoutside.ca.
Is there a specific bear that had a real effect on you, or all of them in certain ways?
All in certain ways. I mean, the 2 that I would say had the biggest impact, I think, one would be the polar bear. I mean, it's such an icon of the, I've done a lot of Arctic reporting. It's such an icon of the Arctic, but it's hard not to just marvel at the presence of these bears when you see them, out on the tundra, right? Like, again, I've done the church, I've gone with scientists up to Churchill and, they get quite close to you on the vehicles, not on the land. And I don't know, just thinking like these bears spend most of their life out on the ice, seeking out this very hard scrabble existence. And through our collective activities and emissions like were threatening all of that and are unlikely to persist past the end of the century for many populations. Churchill's bears are projected to be gone by like 2060 at the earliest. It's kind of hard to fathom. Like that's probably within our lifetime if I if I live quite that long. So I think polar bears, and then I would also say the moon bears that I saw in Southeast Asia are used for biofarming, which is a traditional medicine. So I should say that like my book's mission and purpose, I would sometimes get comments of like, oh, you didn't see all of the bears in the wild. And my goal was never to see all the bears in the wild. It wasn't kind of a checklist book of like, here's each bear in the wild. Like I saw it, that was great, like gonna go home now. It was to explore the ways that we're interacting with bears now. And in the context of the Asiatic black bear, the moon bear, often that's on biofarms in Asia, right? Which are quite horrible places, very upsetting to see. So I think seeing some of those bears in Vietnam, that are in tiny little cages, they can barely move. They might spend 15 years in a cage that they can't even turn around in to have their bile extracted. That for me was, it's very hard to see.
What have you seen when it comes to human and bear interactions that was positive? Is there something are you seeing a lot of people trying to protect them? Are you seeing that?
I mean, I think every bear, those heroes, I guess you could say, that kind of champion each bear. And those were the people that I got to meet when I was reporting this book, people who've dedicated their lives to protecting these species. And it's not all bad news either, right? Like we see grizzly bears in the US have made a tremendous comeback since kind of the 1970s. They were nearly extinct in the US. And now we have bears, that are moving between populations and making big gains. I think Alberta too, right? Like there was trophy hunting for quite some time and that ended, and bears are kind of coming back a little bit too in places like Alberta, if we let them. American black bears, again, like some of these populations were almost gone kind of in the 1900s, and through conservation efforts, we've championed them. China, for better or for worse, has put tons of money into panda conservation and creating national parks. So I think there's a lot of hope to be found. It's not always enough. Right. I think that's kind of the hard truth.
Out of all the bears, I find that sun bears are so interesting. They almost look fake when you see pictures of them or videos of them, right?
That was like the scandal a few years ago where it was like there was a Chinese zoo and people said it was a man in a costume because they like walk on their two legs, they're occasional bipeds. They can kind of toddle around. I always think it looks like they're wearing diapers because like they have these extra folds of skin that like slide down. So they have like a saggy little bum and they're like toddling along. Very long tongues as well, 10-inch tongues.
Yeah, they look like a cartoon version of what you would imagine a bear.
Yeah, and they're quite small, and they're very small too, right? They're like the size of a small dog. So, they're quite interesting bears. And it's funny to think like the sun bear is related to the polar bear. Like they're so like, the extremes.
Something really fascinating. Can you share how bears were featured in indigenous folklore and Greek mythology and just in history? Like how were they?
It kind of runs the gamut, I guess. But in many times, bears were viewed as being one of our closest relatives, right? It was believed that people and bears could be shapeshifters, that we were, kind of related to bears more so than any other species. Eventually, obviously, genetics would disprove that. But because of, the bear's footprint looks a lot like a human footprint if you look at the bear's print, because they can walk on two legs. It was believed that, if you took off the bear's fur, it would be human underneath. And that kind of shaped a lot of the mythology that we have. And we see these stories throughout the world too. In Russia, it's like the word for bear can mean uncle or grandfather. Yeah, it's quite fascinating how independently of each other these stories emerged.
What was the most surprising thing that you learned while researching this book about bears?
I think for me it was how smart bears are. Like I didn't know too much about kind of bear intelligence before I embarked on this project. I knew about bears from an environmental perspective. I assumed that they were decently smart because they could get into garbage pretty well. But I really did not fully comprehend. And to be fair, like scientists don't fully comprehend how smart bears are, but they are indeed like extremely smart. Like they can pass all these tests and these puzzles that like other species like big cannot. They're extremely curious. They can recognize their reflections, things like that. They use tools, like I think that was really, I think one of the moments that I had was I was in Yosemite and I was kind of looking at the design of these bear proofs, where you put your food when you're camping. And like I was struggling with it. And then I saw the park rangers and I'm like, oh yeah, like the bears like figure this out every 3 months. We have to redo them. They teach the other bears how to do it. Like there's a transfer of knowledge there too. So yeah, I think bear smarts, I guess, is what I thought was very interesting.
As humans, what can we do, whether we're encountering bears in nature, whether we're like running into bears in nature, like how can we make sure that we are doing our best to protect them no matter where we are? And then specifically in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, day to day, I mean, if you live in a place that has bears, do not feed the bears, right? Like secure your garbage, lock your car door, removing moving apples from fruit trees and things, right? Bird feeders, things that would draw bears down into trouble. I remember like Banff, it was like, be careful when you put your pumpkins out for Halloween, right? Like there's so many little things that like a fed bear is a dead bear is kind of the phrase, right? So you want to reduce those attractants to give bears the best chance they can have. The sad thing is also seeing bears hit on roads, right? Like trying to protect more land for bears. They're very wide roaming, and that's more of a government policy perspective. But at the individual level, just making sure that, you're not bringing bears into the backyard.
I had interviewed someone in the past who was working on those bridges in Banff that go over the highways, which is very, very cool. Well, not just for bears, right? It's for all wildlife, but people are doing their part. Is there anything else that you would like people to know about bears other than reading your book? They should read your book, but...
They should read my book. Anything else about bears? I mean, I guess kind of like my general takeaway was that, of the 8 remaining species of bears, like I really only could see 3 guaranteed to persist past the end of the century, right? And that would be the brown bear, which is, thousands of brown bears in the world, the American black bear, which has made a tremendous recovery and is kind of a conservation success story. And then panda bears, which even though there's not a lot of them, China's so heavily invested in pandas that it's kind of unfathomable to think that we will lose pandas. But I think for those other 5 species, not much is known about some of them. The sun bear is not that well studied, sloth bears too. Spectacled bears have been getting a lot more attention in recent years, but some of these bear species found in the tropics are just, I don't know how many people in North America have ever heard of a sloth bear before. People normally can't get him. So, kind of just, I guess, bringing people around those conservation efforts, making them aware of these other species that need to help. Yeah, I think it's a really intricate and beautiful relationship that people have had with bears across time and across culture. And I hope that can be preserved.
Thank you for the work that you're doing, not only for bears, but for the environment. Other than posting in the show notes, where can people find 8 Bears, Mythic Past and Imperiled Future?
Your local bookstore, of course. And also order it from Norton, the publisher as well. But ideally, supporting local independent bookstores.
Gloria, is there anything else, any other projects or books that you're currently working on that you want to share? Or is it like, just keeping it on the down low?
Oh, I have ideas, but for now, still climate correspondent covering this beat. Sometimes I get to do a bear story every now and then, so that's always exciting.
It probably keeps you busy.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in bear. People are always asking me bear questions at work, and I'm like, people. It just to me, it just shows how much people are interested in these animals.
Mm-hmm. You're the bear person now? Are you the bear lady?
I get called Bear Girl, which I'm not sure what that nickname is, but yeah.
Gloria Dickie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. For more Let's Take This Outside, go to letstakethisoutside.ca.
Produced and distributed by the Sound Off Media Company.